Hello learners, welcome to another insightful video. In this video, after the later Vedic part, I promised that I'd be talking about Buddhism and Jainism. Because I told you that in the society after Vedic and after later Vedic period, there's some kind of atrocities happening, some kind of discrimination has started on the land and all such like Varna based. Now Varna is no more like in occupation based but based on the birth. So such kind of things, such kind of extreme things. Remember, whenever the society reach its peak, it has to come down or some kind of rebel kind of attitude will come into the people. So that is how because of that kind of atrocity speaking, the result is our Buddhism and Jainism. In this period, not just Buddhism and Jainism, but there are also other religions or other kind of philosophies happened. But in this particular video, we'll just talk about Buddhism and Jainism. And also remember, coming to this particular philosophy, we directly try to address it into our ancient history part or generally in our GS1 part. But this particular core philosophies which are very proud of our land, this can be used even in our ethics paper. I will show you how, which all way we can use this particular topic in ethics, and also how definitely we know that this is very useful in our prelims, and also how this kind of philosophies are useful in the personality development. So this particular relevance would be for our GS1 and obviously to the prelims, and coming to mains, not just GS1 but also GS4 and the personality development which is in our interview stage. So this core philosophy is very important, and at the end we will see how exactly or what is the current status of these religions in the country. Yeah, so the relevance, as I told you in GS1, definitely we know the importance. In our ancient Indian history, the topic of origins and spread, definitely we are bound to study this topic. Buddhism and Jainism were part of the 6th century BCE, which is the part of our syllabus, and the reform movements. If you remember, I have told that socio-political or religious reforms or any movements related to that in our history is very important, and in contemporary times it's very important for us to understand that. So that is how the key factor or key importance lies of this topic. And great personalities, I told you, throughout the history, irrespective of ancient, medieval and modern, the personalities, not just the Indian personalities but also global personalities are very important. So Buddha and his teachings, his counsels, the spread of regions in the different part of the world, how it is important, and it's very important. And coming to Mahavira and the development of Jain doctrines. So this particular slide will help you whenever you study Jainism or whenever you study Buddhism, not just this too, but any other philosophy. See to it that you're correcting or you're covering all the topics, like where is that exactly getting originated from, and who and how it is getting spreaded, who is responsible for the spread of that particular philosophy, and who are the key personalities, and what is the cultural impact of that particular philosophy. Like coming to these two philosophies, how did they contribute to our Indian architecture, like the stupas, the chaityas, the viharas and the Jain temples? How in respect to art, how it got impacted, like we know our Ajanta and Ellora caves. Next, what is the literature, importance, how literature has been influenced, like our Pali and our Jain Agamas. So these kind of key points you need to remember when you study the philosophies, and how it is helping or how it is challenging the present society or present whatever ongoing philosophies are there. Like how the philosophy, see, caste is something which is only like a unique feature of the Indian land. So definitely if some philosophy is coming out in the country, or some philosophy or some philosopher is coming out and preaching, definitely it would be against your caste system. So that philosophy, how it is challenging your caste hierarchy, how it is challenging ritualism, and how it is promoting egalitarianism and ethical living. See, nobody is saying that the present ongoing philosophy or the religion is not ethical or it doesn't have some kind of egalitarianism. No, that doesn't mean that. Some kind of bad features, whatever present, that they will try to counter, but not the whole religion. So countering only that bad religion would be the outcome of the new forms. So you need to know how they are challenging that kind of bad part of that existing religion. How it is influencing the later movements, and the rulers like Ashoka and Harsha in the history, they were the patrons of this particular religion. You need to know, whenever you study about another philosophies or religion, you should know who are the patrons, how the further movements got influenced. So this is kind of a strategy whenever you pick up any religion or a philosophy newly to the land. And in coming to significance in the prelims perspective, that was for your mains. You need to have that kind of analytical approach. Coming to prelims, you know that if you do your proper previous year question analysis, you will understand that there will be questions on the founders. What are the doctrines? Like in our Buddhism, we know the Four Noble Truths. So what exactly the philosophy is preaching? What are the doctrines present in that? And if there are any sects further on, definitely there will be the bifurcation, because it's ultimately human mentality. Even though how good or the core principle would be, the human mentality will try to divide. So what are the further sects involved? What are the symbols of that particular religion or the philosophy? And what are the historical events? Like in our Buddhism, we have Buddhist councils. So if there are any historical events present, you need to know those facts. So this is the relevance for the prelims. Now, most importantly, how this particular topics or this kind of topics can be used in our GS4. See, any philosophy will try to talk about the ethical values like our non-violence or ahimsa, how this is very important. This particular principle is central to both Buddhism and Jainism, and also Gandhian philosophy. So this kind of interlinkaging the topic and using in the ethics paper will definitely make you to stand off the crowd. So in this way, that core, whatever ethical principle is there, how you're attaching in the multi-dimensional way. Yes, they are talking about Four Noble Truths. They are talking about non-violence. But also in our history syllabus, there is also another personality who is famously talking about non-violence, our Gandhian. So how that principle and this principle, how you correlate and write in the answer is what is very important. And also other ethical, values like truthfulness, compassion and empathy. Next, what are the philosophical concepts? Like we have a concept called middle path. We have a concept called detachment and self-discipline. Don't you think to run the governance or to have a proper good governance, we want this kind of things? Middle path will make you to not get into the extremes but stand neutral. That is how you're going to write in your mains as well. If any political issue is also being asked, you need to have a neutral stand. So when you follow middle path, even you will excel in your answers and also in life. So in this way, you need to link this particular philosophy in your ethics paper as well. Contemporary relevance, how it can be tackling our environmental ethics, like the principles of non-violence and respect for life will promote our sustainability. Already our ancient philosophers have been telling, they're thumping their chest and telling that we need to follow this kind of thing so that we can have sustainable life. Conflict resolution, ongoing wars, whatever is there, these principles will help us to have some kind of conflict resolution and follow in our peaceful way. And also in the case studies, use ethical principles from Buddhism and Jainism so that you can justify your decisions whenever you're full dilemma to relating to your honesty, fairness and duty. Yes, definitely you will also have some kind of principles. But when you back up that statement saying that Buddha during that time or in his book or in his saying or in his sermon has told this, so this kind of principles will help in the contemporary times. If this kind of statement if you write, why don't you score marks? So this is how you link a topic in a multi-dimensional way. This is how you should have an integrated approach for every other topic. So now we'll start what exactly is Buddhism. So we'll have some key facts first in our notes. You know that the founder is our Gautam Buddha. He was belonging to this particular time period roughly. We cannot say this particular date, but according to historians, we believe this. See, remember that this fact is also important because when in prelims they might ask you who is the contemporary of particular philosopher, you should know, because in our previous year question they have asked you so and so person and who was the contemporary. In the options it was somewhere like related to Babur. So you should definitely know facts, not exact facts but at least roughly. And he was being born in the present day Nepal in the place called Lumbini, and his original name was Siddhartha Gautama. After attaining enlightenment, we started calling him Gautam Buddha. And he belonged to a clan called Shakya. His parents, coming to his father, is Suddhodana and mother is Queen Mahamaya. He attained enlightenment at Bodh Gaya. It's a place in Bihar, and under the tree, Bodhi tree. These facts are also very important. See, in the options, if you see, if not UPSC, any other competitive exams, they might ask you under which tree Gautam Buddha got enlightened. In the options, you may find banyan tree, people tree, Bodhi tree and all. What will you answer? Just because banyan tree is big, simply your mind might go there. So this kind of facts are also important, if not for UPSC, some other competitive exams. And he gave the first sermon at a place called Sarnath, Varanasi, also known as Dharma Chakra Parivartana. This kind of technical terms are very important. Dharma Chakra Parivartana is nothing but turning of the wheel of Dharma. There is a picture associated. I'll try to show that. And will not call the death or the unconscious state of Buddha as a death, but we call it as Parinirvana. There is a concept called Nirvana and there is a concept called Parinirvana. So when Buddha kind of felt unconscious forever, we do not use such kind of death or passed away, this kind of words to the great philosophers. So the word here is Parinirvana. He attained that Parinirvana in a place called Kushinagar in Uttar Pradesh. If we know, recently our Honorable Prime Minister tried to have some kind of meeting with the global people or a global tourism at Kushinagar. And this is how in your notes you link your current affairs as well. Now, what are the core teachings? There are 6 core teachings every aspirant should remember of Buddha. This core 6 principles or teachings, whenever asked, you should note that Buddha has told this. Whenever related to ethical kind of questions are posed to you, you need to be able to write. So first principle or first teaching would be the 4 noble truths. First one is, he will say that life is full of suffering. And second, the cause of suffering is our desire. The technical term would be tanha. And suffering can be ended by our overcoming these desires. And the path to end the suffering would be our noble eightfold path. So this is a following for the next teaching. The 4th truth, he said that if you have to end the suffering, I have given you 8 rules. You follow that and that is when you will end your suffering. But for the first 4 truths is dukkha. That means definitely dukkha means definitely your life is going to be full of sufferings. Samudaya, you should understand that what is the cause of suffering, and the cause of suffering would be your desire. Nirodha, the suffering can be ended by overcoming that desire. And magga means follow the eightfold path which I have given to end the above 3. So these are the 4 noble truths Buddha said. Now we will see what are those noble eightfold paths. Remember, whenever you're making notes of this kind of philosophies, try to make it in a pictorial way. Try to draw a chakra. I have told you that wheel of dharma. So try to draw this kind of thing where you have the spokes in it and you can place the 8 truths. First one, he will ask you to have a right view. Second, the right intention. View is the eye, intention is your brain. Right speech, which is your mouth. I'll give you a trick to remember this. When you have a right sight, right view, and when you think properly after viewing it, and when you have a proper speech, that is when you will have a right action. Your action would be right when the above 3 are correct. When your actions is correct, definitely you will have a right livelihood. You will not get into a negative path. Then when you have your right livelihood, you'll put the right kind of effort to earn money. Then when you get right kind of effort and outcome, you'll have a right mindfulness. And that will lead to your right concentration. So this is a way kind of a trick where you interlink one point to the other by following the eightfold path. He said that you will end your sufferings, which is first of all, ultimately you should end your desire. To end your desires, you should follow this 8 path. Nextly, there are 3 jewels associated with Buddhism. First one is the word Buddha. He or she, there is no she over here unfortunately, but the one who gets enlightened is called as Buddha. And Dharma means whatever the teachings of Buddha are there, that would be Dharma. And Sangha means the community of monks and nuns who all together live. All the Buddhist monks who ever live together, that is called Sangha. So these are the 3 jewels which are also called Three Ratna. See, this kind of technical terms are important. They'll ask you, the term Three Ratna is associated to which of the following? Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism and Islam. Islam definitely you'll try to eliminate, but you might get confused between Buddhism and Jainism. So associate everything. Three Ratna means, remember the first one, Buddha, the one who enlightened person. So Buddha is definitely associated with Buddhism. In this way you need to link and study. So right now we have seen what are the four noble truths. Secondly, to attain or to end that desire, we had an eightfold path, and there are three jewels in the Buddhism. Next, the doctrine of dependent origination, or also called as Pratya Samutpada, means everything arises due to a cause. Nothing is permanent. Whatever is happening in your life, there will be a cause or there will be a reason for such kind of happenings. And remember, if that happening is either good or bad, that is never going to be permanent in your life. That means you should stop having desire. That means you should not go into the extremes. When something bad is happening in your life, doesn't mean you need to end your life. When something good is happening in your life, doesn't mean you need to get enlightened and show some kind of attitude towards the world. So the extremes you should never go because of your present situation. There will be a reason for it, and that whatever is happening, that is not permanent. That means dependent origination. You should not dependent on your cause. Next, concept of nirvana. I said parinirvana, before that nirvana. That means in our Hinduism, we call the word, in our Sanskrit or Hinduism, we say moksha. So the same way that is called nirvana, is the cessation of suffering and ultimate liberation. When you attain the ultimate liberation, when you are considered as an enlightened one, that is when the so-and-so monk is considered as he has attained nirvana. Then belief in Atman, which says that no permanent soul or self, contrast to Hindu concept of Atman. The word Atman and Anantatman. See, this is a contrast word to Hinduism. Atman is associated to our Hinduism. Atman in Hinduism means your soul. Here in Buddhism, they will say that there is no permanent soul. People come for a reason and they need to follow that kind of thing, and they do not have any purpose or something. They come, they go. In Atman, soul, in our Hinduism, this is kind of a bit different topic to be discussed, but he is contradicting not only caste hierarchy or a caste system, but also this kind of core concept of Hinduism. So next, very important thing, the four Buddhist councils, very important for our mains and also prelims. Mains in art and architecture, they might ask you like, so-and-so council has done, if that particular place is there. Now suppose Patliputra is there. Whenever you're studying about Patliputra, you should know what are the architectural relevance of that particular thing. Or if there is any text associated for that, like text in the sense literature. So our first Buddhist council happened in Rajgriha, somewhere between this, and who is the patron? Ajatashatru is the patron. And what is the outcome of this council? The compilation of the teachings of Sutta Pitaka and Vinaya Pitaka. These two texts got compiled in the first council, which was held at Rajgriha, and the patron was Ajatashatru. And coming to our second Buddhist council, it happened at a place called Vaishali, and who is the patron? Kal Ashok is the patron. And what happened? There was a split between our Tavirvadans and our Mahasanghikas. There was a split. In the first, the text got compiled. It's kind of a good. Second one, there was a split. And the third Buddhist council, it happened in Patliputra. And who is our patron? The great Ashoka. And there, the codification of doctrines happened, and the spread of Buddhism to different lands has started. In our fourth Buddhist council, it has happened in Kashmir, and who is the patron? Kanishka. What happened? Rise of Mahayana Buddhism. I said you that we need to learn about the sects and all. Mahayana Buddhism and one such sect. We'll see in the following slides. So you need to understand that not just Buddha was preaching to his disciples, but also there was patrons. There was some kind of patrons from the emperors, so that the religion can get spreaded. So next, as I told that during Kanishka time, there was been separation. There was a form of another sect. So these are the three important sects after Buddhism or in Buddhism. First one is Hinayana Buddhism, which is also called as Theravada Buddhism. It believes in the individual salvation and there is no worship of idols. So this is some kind of an original kind of a religion, because Buddha never said that you need to worship me or put me as an idol or put me as a painting and put me garlands and all. No, you follow those principles so to attain liberation or nirvana on your own. In the same way, Hinayana Buddhism believes that the individual salvation is important. You need not to worship the idols, and this kind of Buddhism is prominent in our Sri Lanka, Thailand and Myanmar. The second sect is our Mahayana Buddhism. It believes in universal salvation and it says that we need to worship Buddha and Bodhisattvas. That means some kind of idol worship, they believe in that. And where it is prominent in China, Japan, Korea and Tibet. There is also another sect which is also called, as Vajrayana Buddhism. This focuses on our rituals, mantras and meditation. It is prominent in Tibet and Mongolia. See, if we know Buddha or his teachings, he has never preached that you need to follow some kind of rituals or you need to follow some kind of thing. And what is irony is our Hindus has put him, Buddha, as the avatar of Vishnu. We'll see that will be one kind of or one reason for the decline. We'll see that. So the original whatever the preachings or the original principle, whatever Buddha was expecting people to follow, that got deviated when different sects got formed. Now this particular thing will be discussing on our art and architecture part, not in this, but generally whenever you study architecture related things of Buddhism, you need to remember that you study the stupas properly. What are the famous stupas? Like our Sanchi Stupa, Amravati Stupa and Barhut Stupa. These are the examples. So you need to study the stupas very properly. And coming to rock cut caves like our Ajanta and Ellora caves in Maharashtra. This is example. So rock cut caves are important architectural feature of Buddhism. And a concept called Chaitya, where the monks try to kind of pray, and viharas like monasteries. There are different places where the Chaityas and viharas are there. So whenever you study art and architecture related to Buddhism, make sure that you should study these important points. Now, how did it spread to different lands? First of all, because of the patrons, because one such great patron is our Emperor Ashoka. We know that he ended war of Kalinga because he got influenced some kind of enlightenment. That's a different story. We'll discuss in the Mauryan times. But he is a one such patron where Buddhism got spreaded to the different parts of the world very well. Now, what is the reason? This is important. Why did Buddhism got declined in India? We'll see the key factors or the data associated to this as well. See, in mains, they'll ask you this kind of question. They'll not ask you the facts or something. They'll ask you to analyze what are the factors responsible or what is the reason why the Buddhism got declined in India. We know that it's a very important topic even in our anthropology optional. So it's very important in our mains as well. So first of all, the reason would be because of the internal conflicts, because the monasteries or the monks got corrupted. Ultimately, humans with wealth and land grants, whatever the emperor used to give, they used to get corrupted, and this resulted in the weakening of the spiritual and societal influence. Obviously, if monks only got corrupted, from where will people get motivated to join or to follow the path of Buddhism? Second one, sectarian divisions. This diluted the very core philosophy of the religion itself and the loss of simplicity. Grand temples, grand monasteries, monks are already corrupted. They want separate land kind of land grants is happening. They want gifts and all. So the core, actually Buddhism is a very simple. He preaches that the simple life is what is important to attain nirvana. That the core thing only got lost. So the internal factor, the religion's internal factors, internal philosophy is only got eradicated, and that is the main reason why it got declined. Second, revival of Hinduism. To tackle that or to counter that caste hierarchy, the Buddhism and Jainism has come. But if you see after Guptan period, there is a very mass revival of Buddhism. So the Bhakti movement in our ancient history is very important. Hinduism was reasserting that we are there. Our presence is still there. And they tried, very important, and a funny thing is that they associated Buddha as an avatar of Vishnu. ninth avatar of Vishnu, and they said that there is nothing distinct. He is also part of Hinduism. You guys need not to go and join into a separate religion. This is the most ironical part of our land. So these two are the main important factors why Buddhism got declined. And the third one is the patronage shift. Before and all, the kings like Emperor Ashoka and Kanishka, they are very great kings. They used to patron, but after some certain kind of a shift has happened during Guptan times, there is a lot of patron done to the Hinduism. Most importantly, there's a different sect like Vaishnavism and Shaivism. This kind of sects already were there. These people got patronaged from the great emperors rather than this kind of simple philosophies. So this can be, this is actually one of the reason. And the other reason is our Muslim invasion. There's a lot of destruction. Not only Hindu temples or sites got destructed, but also Buddhists like our Nalanda and Vikramshila by invaders like Bakhtiyar Khilji in the 12th century led to the physical and intellectual collapse of the Buddhist institutions. Whatever the important knowledge was being stored, that also got eradicated because of such kind of invasions. And the geographical shifts. Apart from India, if we see present there are good number of decent number of people present in the countries like China, Japan and Southeast Asia. Because before they spread and they tried to store it, we couldn't store it because of the another factors. Now, what is the current status? According to our 2011 census, the Buddhist population is roughly between 0.7% in the India population, and the major concentration is not across the country, but we can see in significant concentration of this population in Maharashtra, Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim. If you see, it's mostly in the northeast, and coming to here, it's in Maharashtra. And also Neo-Buddhist movement has happened by our Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in 1956. Ultimately, we know that how Ambedkar sir was also fed up with this caste-based hierarchical structure. So he kind of, to tackle that, he started Neo-Buddhist movement. And this gave that showcase that there was some kind of a continuity to influence the social justice part. Prominent Buddhist sites are still there in the country, like our Bodh Gaya or the Mahabodhi temples in Sarnath, Kushinagar and Ajanta Ellora caves are the major pilgrimage sites. And to promote that, we have a Buddhist tourism circuit, and also we have international conferences. A very important conference which was happened in Kushinagar. I think there was also a question during that year of the time. So this kind of government initiatives are also done so that we have to protect whatever the significant population are there. And the global influence, because India remains a key destination. Ultimately, the religion got started over here itself. So people will try to come and visit, even though they have grand monasteries all over the globe. They'll try to come to the land because the birth of Buddha happened in the previous ancient land of our country. So this is the holistic understanding of Buddhism. Today it might have lost its significance, but the legacy, the philosophy of this ancient philosophy or the ancient religion still continues in the land. In the next video or in the next class, we'll try to understand Jainism in the same aspect. Thank you.